Well, it's always an honor and a delight, privilege when we can have our dear friend, Professor Peter Bolland. Friend doesn't really cut it anymore, your family might have. Okay. But Professor Bolland is the Department Chair of Comparative Philosophy and Religious Studies at Southwestern College. And I think I cheekily introduced you one time this way, and I'm going to do it again. Professor Bolland is, for parents of students at the university, is the most feared professor, the person that can take a business, finance, or entrepreneurial science major and flip them into the high-paying careers in philosophy and religious study. Oh, he's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful professor, wonderful person in general, wonderful, just wonderful, wonderful. He also, I'd be remiss in saying, has a tremendous book called The Seven Stone Path out, which even some of our most senior devotees find a wonderful workbook and wonderfully enriching. So we're always honored and delighted to have him with us. His topic today is the contemplative life, a survival strategy, a very much on point topic today. So, ladies and gentlemen, so please welcome Professor Bolland. Thank you, brother. Sorry, pour it on like that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for that glorious music. It's wonderful to hear all four of you pulling something precious out of the ether and putting it in all of our ears. It's just a wonderful send-off to this little journey that I want to invite you on with me, and that is this idea of the contemplative life as strategy. And it comes out of my own lifelong interest in world religions, and particularly the monastic or contemplative traditions, although I've never been a resident at any place like that, but I've visited a lot of them and always feel deep affinity with communities of intentional spirituality. And so it was a real delight when about 7, 8, 9 years ago, I met Swami Harinamananda. Good morning to you on Zoom. I think you're recuperating and aren't able to be with us in this room today, but I think you're present with us anyway. And to be here in this really incredible Sangha, this community, is always a real highlight on my calendar. We met when Swami was brought to a talk that I was giving on Philip Goldberg's remarkable book, Veda. I think it's called American Veda. Some of you know this book. It's an incredible, and I've since got the opportunity to become friends with Philip Goldberg. I'm on his podcast once in a while. He did an amazing thing, and he told the story of how Vedanta particularly came to the United States. And a lot of you know big pieces of that story. Obviously, the founder of the Vedanta Society, and also our friends up at the Self-Realization Fellowship. Those two movements, early 20th century, essentially, brought those ancient ideas to the States, and now you can get a yoga mat at Walmart. And everybody who gets an Academy Award says namaste. And so this has sort of gone mainstream, much to the frustration of some tradition purists, but much to the delight of others who are happy that these ideas have been somewhat universalized, in even if the forms distort with each additional step of distance away from their sources. But so I don't know if I'm part of the problem or part of the solution, but I am drawn to these Indian traditions particularly. But this talk today really kind of goes a little bit beyond that. I'm going to step just out once in a while so I can see what it is that I'm showing you. Oh, okay. So this is, of course, the one of the most famous monasteries in the world, and called what? Tiger's Den, Tiger's Lair, something like. It's in Bhutan, and it takes 2 hours for tourists to hike from where the bus leaves you off to get up to this place. But I'm showing you this picture because it is an object of universal fascination. This idea of people building these amazing, incredible, isolated places to go live apart from the busyness of the world. So that is, I suppose, the headline about the contemplative or the monastic life, this idea of retreating from the day-to-day transactional lives of householders that are often overwhelming. And the reason I'm drawn to this subject today and why I'm calling this talk The Contemplative Life as Survival Strategies, because everywhere I go and give talks like this off campus, and even from some of my students, I'm often approached afterwards, and in a whispered voice, people will say, Peter, what advice can you give us about how to survive these times? I'm out of tools. My normal tools aren't working. I'm going mad. I'm angry. I'm in despair. I have difficulty sleeping. I am full of resentment. And the restlessness has just crashed over me, and I feel like I'm drowning. I'm not dramatizing this. This is what people literally say to me these days. And they say it in a whispered voice because you have to say it quietly because you don't know who's around. There are people all over the place who are excited and thrilled by the new policies and actions being taken by those currently in power. This is not a political talk today. Don't get nervous. I'm not talking about Republicans or Democrats. This is soul stuff we're talking about here. And so I'm not going to go off into all kinds of current events and political historical references. They will come up in an adjunct way, but that is sort of the context of what I'm thinking about. So, to my delight, just over a week ago, this document arrived in my mailbox. It's the annual newsletter called Oneing of the Centers for Action and the Center for Action and Contemplation, CAC, out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is a contemplative slash activist group in Albuquerque, New Mexico, founded by a Roman Catholic Franciscan friar called Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr, and who's still with us, but he's aging and not terribly well, so he's passed a lot of the leadership of the CAC to this fellow, Brian McLaren. And Brian McLaren is a progressive former Christian minister who left a kind of evangelical conservative Christian world, became progressive, and I suppose you have a sense of what that means, no longer a fundamentalist, no longer a literalist, looking for ways to, as Richard Rohr has devoted his life, to universalizing the Christian mission far beyond the bounds of Christianity. However, today I want to think about this in universal terms, because obviously we are in the house of a wonderful contemplative tradition that goes back far earlier than Christianity. Christianity is the new kid on the block. And there are, well, Islam, I guess, is even newer. But we want to think about these traditions as interconnected. So I'm thinking about this progressive Christian writer who wrote this article called Islands of Sanity, and that was in this thing. And I opened it up and I read it. And I think he became the director. I'm going to step a little bit outside here because I do need to read these slides. He did become the director, as I mentioned already. And in this article, I found some food that I wanted to share with you today. I was so struck by this. I knew I was coming here. I was invited by Swami some time ago, but I didn't have a topic in mind. And I thought this might be the perfect place in a contemplative community with obviously a public-facing community of us who come in out of our householder lives. So what this piece really helped me understand was, how are there practices in traditional contemplative communities that we householders can use, that we regular folks can use, folks who are not living the monastic life in literal terms? And spoiler alert, the answer is yes, obviously, or I wouldn't be with you here today. I think there are a lot of interesting things. And Brian McLaren does a really nice job. So just to check in where we are, taking our soul pulse in these difficult times, as I already mentioned, what I hear everywhere I teach, and including the desperate emails that I get from people who really are looking for strategies to not lose their ever-loving minds in these difficult times. And a lot of people are also experiencing deep personal rifts in their neighborhoods, between neighbors, deep personal rifts in their families. And this has been going on for 10 years now. Ever since the current president came down the escalator in Trump Tower on January 16th, 2015, and announced his candidacy for president, and he won that time against Hillary Clinton, did his 4-year run, then lost to Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, and then spent the next 4 years propagandizing about how that election had been stolen. Obviously, we know what happened in January 6th, right after his election. And then now he is in the White House again, and everything that's unfolding is unfolding. So people who have some concerns about that have been living with those concerns now for, well, in a couple of days, many, many, many years. and that is driving a lot of the messaging that I'm getting. So there is this deep longing for healing, for truth, for sanity. There's a lot of grieving about what was lost. I have a dear friend who is a biology researcher at USC, and she's telling me what the inside story is in the scientific community about how about 15-year grants are just being erased with an email, and large projects in the sciences are just evaporating, and people are looking at each other and wondering, what are we going to do? How is this helping anybody? So if you're not following the news closely, you can easily be forgiven for not, because it's just too much, right? For not really cataloging all of the ripples that are coming out of these astonishing and rapid changes. And so the tenuous grasp we have, so many of us have on the hope that any of it can be recovered and rebuilt. Because as my researcher friend tells me, these grants take 10 years to apply for, and then another 5 years to deliver. So it's not like in 3 years when this administration goes away, a switch can be thrown and the scientific community can be rebuilt. It's going to take 15 years after that to restore everything. So this is, those of us that are in our older years, this is going to be the rest of our life before any of this can be kind of turned around. So that is result, again, I'm not here to catalog all these kind of current event issues. I'm talking about this at a kind of emotional level. For a lot of people, this is creating a very difficult spiritual environment in which to feel okay, in which to feel peaceful. And the rise of authoritarian regimes the world over, and the way propaganda and disinformation has, as I mentioned before, in many cases taken our sons, taken our daughters, taken our spouses, taken our parents, taken our neighbors. I have so many people roughly my age who tell me, Peter, I can't talk to my sons anymore. I don't know how to talk to them in their red hats. And so I'm cataloging with you with just this one slide, kind of the state of the turmoil that drives us into the question that I want to think about with you today. And I'm put on my philosophy professor hat. I'm calling it epistemological relativism. Epistemology is that study of knowledge. It's that branch of philosophy that deals with the question, what is true? And relativism is, of course, the idea that there is no truth. That truth is whatever you want to say it is. That everything's just an opinion. And there seems to be a lot of that in the air these days. We kind of lost the idea of expertise, that people can have more knowledge than you. We live in a strange time where we've in many ways lost the very idea of truth. One of the things authoritarian regimes have always done, now I didn't volunteer for this, but I've become kind of a student of tyranny, fascism and authoritarianism in the last couple of years, and reading a lot about it. And when you look back through history in the 1930s in Europe and many, 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 many other times throughout human history, these are just pendulum swings. And when the world shifts toward authoritarianism, one of the strategies that authoritarian regimes employ is flood the zone. This is how Steve Bannon describes it. He says, our enemy, he says to his followers, is not the Democratic Party. Our enemy is the media. And the way we're going to destroy the media is we're going to flood the zone with so much chaotic information every day that no one will know what to do with it. And people receiving this media will begin to realize that there's no way to determine what's really true. And you feel that cynicism around our vaccine struggles and around so many other things, that people have deep distrust of the so-called experts. They find somebody on YouTube, they call that doing their research. And I have a YouTube channel. All it takes is an iPhone and internet, and you are a YouTube guy. And those are not peer-reviewed processes. So this is the other phrase that's often associated with the rise of fascism is move fast and break things. So the Doge efforts to dismantle the New Deal, Medicare, Social Security, the idea of some kind of social web, all of that destruction, especially to people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who rely on those programs for their literal survival. These are enormous threats. So what, from my perspective, kind of philosophically this morning, all of that causes great cognitive distress in a great number of us. So slow thinking, deliberation, and depth has been replaced, McLaren writes, with fast thinking, fast, superficial, and shallow thinking, that is to say, reactivity. This is the modern malady. This is where we find ourselves, waking up in the morning, scrolling through our phones, and it's impossible to really understand, what do I really know right now about this? Who can I really trust? Which voices can I trust? And all of that is sort of slipping through our fingers. And so these tactics have largely achieved their stated aim, that is to drive the populace into cynicism, defeatism, apathy, and fatigue. A lot of us, the feeling I get from a lot of people who come up to me and ask me these questions is, I'm numb. I'm not even mad anymore, I'm just numb. And I don't know what to do. And so there's this sense of retreat. But as a lot of activists, and God bless all the people walking today, there's a lot of activists who are saying that feeling of numbness, that feeling of powerlessness, that feeling of despair, what you need to understand is that is a strategic goal of authoritarian regimes. This is what they always do. Let's not just put National Guard on the street in LA, let's get US Marines, forces trained for tactical war, and that no one in California invited or asked for. And as a strategy to drive people further and further back into that kind of fearful paralysis. So what if we simply started saying this out loud and becoming more conscious of the tactics of any authoritarian or would-be authoritarian regime? Fascism wants people to feel tired. Fascism wants people to feel hopeless and powerless and afraid. And so where do we go is the question for us in this spiritual inquiry. Where do we go to restore our natural balance, our soul health? Where do we go to reclaim our innate joy, peace, and hopefulness? Because we still have that. It's in here somewhere, and we remember it, and we even taste it sometimes. And so how can we reclaim our intellectual and emotional intelligence? Something has destabilized us greatly. And how do we find something to restabilize us? And here's another way to say it. Where can we go to learn how to reestablish slow thinking, deliberation, and depth, knowing that only when we allow these conditions to shape our consciousness can truth, peace, and wellness arise? I have this very strong feeling that everything is at stake. that when you lose your capacity to be still, to be calm, when you lose your innate loving kindness, your fundamental optimism in the abundance of the universe, when those things are scraped off of you by fear, this is a kind of soul death. And when you lose connection with that sacred authority, other authorities come in and try to claim fealty. So this still sounds like, to many of us, like a kind of political talk, but I'm doing my best to kind of put it on the level of soul wellness as the principal theme. So that's what Brian McLaren's piece looks at in a really interesting way, and I want to share some points from it. How can maybe we can learn something from the contemplative monastic life that we can employ as tools as medicine for some of these challenges. So just a little foundational work here. The term contemplative, just to be super clear about it, it comes from first century Christianity in the English language anyway. A time, by the way, a time before the Bible was assembled, and a time before the rise of the Church of Rome, and a time before the establishment of doctrine, things like the Nicene Creed. So Jesus lived when he lived, the first 35 years of the first century. Paul was roughly a contemporary. The Gospels were written between the years 60, 70, 80, and 90. And by the end of the first century, the letters of Paul are scattered around, the Gospels are scattered around. There's the Hebrew Bible, of course. But the Bible you and I know has not been put together yet, and it won't be until almost the 3rd century. So in the 1st and 2nd century, the Jesus followers, they're not even really called Christians yet, it's a later word. They called themselves followers of the way, which sounds very Mandalorian, if I could make a cultural reference there. These script writers are always raiding our history. So very Taoist, right? Followers of the way. So Jesus was a teacher among many in the Mediterranean that had gathered a number of followers. And it's interesting to me that before the church, before the creeds, and before the Bible was assembled, early followers of Jesus started practicing contemplative practices. And so if you're interested in the earliest roots of Christian life, you go to the contemplative tradition. From Latin, contemplative, con means with or together, and templum originally meaning open space for reflection and prayer, like a room like this. In fact, the word temple comes from that same word. So contemplative means to come together to be in spiritual community, either in silence or in prayer or in liturgy or in some other rituals, in puja, as we say in this tradition, and even in a kind of jnana yoga way, in intellectual inquiry and study of topics like this. This is a form of contemplative practice as well. And so all of that is sort of wrapped up in the contemplative life. And when the followers of Jesus were a loose-knit community, more rooted in religious experience than doctrine, in wordless mysticism than scriptural study. The first monastics didn't have anything to read. They weren't studying scripture or reciting creeds. I don't know what they were doing. We don't really know what they were doing because there's not a lot of written record. They're just praying and experiencing the Holy Spirit. And long before the official theological positions had been established and institutionalized. And we call them the desert abbas and ammas from Aramaic, the desert fathers and mothers. These men and women, largely in places like Egypt and Syria in the 2nd century, who just started going off in the desert on their own. I suppose because Jesus did that. Those stories were going around. When he was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, what does he do? He goes into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. And so there are many moments in the story of Jesus' life where he does go off to be by himself. Because every time he's in town, everybody's crowding around him and grabbing his hem and hoping to be healed, because it's a drag to be like paparazzi'd all the time. I mean, he loves to be in the community, he loves to heal and feed people, but a guy needs a little quiet sometimes. So maybe right in that story of Jesus' life is that middle path between community and solitude, which becomes part of the monastic template. So yeah, out of very early Christianity, largely in Egypt and, as I said, Syria and a few other places, grew a monastic movement predicated on solitude, prayer, and contemplation away from society and deep in the wilderness. So these desert fathers and mothers, and Saint Anthony is one of the most famous ones, one of the first to sort of establish a few rules. Later comes, of course, Saint Benedict and all of the other monastic traditions in the Christian church. This stuff has been going on for centuries already in India, obviously, but I'm kind of coming out of this branch of the tree at the moment. And so here in the West, in the dominant religion of Christianity, this is the source of this contemplative movement. And did I just do something? Oh, I just did something. That was just a little, I was losing a few of you, so we just make random noises sometimes to get everybody back. Okay, good. Everybody here? Yeah. I thought that's the worst ringtone I've ever heard. Just random machine hissing. Either that or the best, I don't know. But anyway, so obviously indigenous peoples the world over, we could talk about the 10,000 indigenous tribes here in the Americas, from the North to the South Pole, going on vision quests alone. This is a primal human thing that we do to get away, to be quiet. It isn't just in the big formal religions. So that to get away from everything known and familiar, and thereby rendering their consciousness into the shape of deep alignment with the sacred depths just beneath the surface of all things. I gave a talk at Caleb Lyons' wonderful church over here. I just drove by it coming here, UCC, University Christian Church, across from the post office and the DMV, the one that vandals keep ripping down all the rainbow-colored doors from and rainbow flags. It's an incredibly progressive Christian community. And I gave a talk there last night, a part 2 of a talk called Wisdom in Crisis, Crisis as Opportunity. And a woman at the end of the talk, after we had a really rich sangha, a really rich discussion, a woman said, Peter, and she was elderly, 85, 95. She said, Peter, I don't know if it's okay, but sometimes when I sit still in the quiet by myself, I feel a sense of peace and wellness come over me. And it's so funny the way she framed it, like, is this okay to feel okay sometimes? Am I supposed to just be like, all the time, which is how I feel the other 23 and a half hours of the day? I can't do math. And it was so charming the way she said it. And that just being in the silence was weirdly restorative. She didn't have to do a meditation or say a chant or read a book or do anything. She just to breathe and to allow and to surrender and not ask anything and not need to know or understand anything. All the questions just evaporate. And in that stillness, she said, something welled up that she tried to name. It was hard to name, but she said, I just feel okay. And it's like she was asking us permission. Is that okay if I feel like that once in a while? It was so cute. And then later I just spoke to her after the event, and her friend confessed to me, you know who this is? And I said, no, she was a nun for many years in her life in the Roman Catholic tradition. Got kicked out of that tradition. I know there's a good story there, but I did not get it, so I can't share it with you. But who gets kicked out of a nunnery? I guess it's possible. But so there's someone who was, of course, drawn to and immersed in a contemplative community. So that was an interesting discussion. So what is the contemplative life? What am I kind of driving at with this? So out of the experiences of the early desert fathers and mothers, the monastic tradition was born in the West. And monastic, just a little more etymology here, I can't resist, just in case you're curious. It comes from the Greek monazine, which means live alone. And in Latin, monad means essentially one or singularity. Those in the Vedanta tradition who lean toward Advaita Vedanta would recognize the word monism, probably, the idea of non-duality, that there is only one reality. All energy, all matter, and all consciousness are emanations of one fundamental underlying ground of being called Brahman, and that is, in Western philosophical terminology, that's monism. I prefer the term non-dualism. It's a little clearer, but in any event, here's the same word, here's the same idea. So there is no sense in separating monasticism from the contemplative tradition. Monasticism, contemplation, I'm not going to worry about dividing these things. Monastics practice contemplation. People who practice contemplation have deep affinities with monastic traditions. We'll just leave it loose like that. They've largely, if it was a Venn diagram, they would generally overlap. But I guess we're exploring this question today. Can I be a contemplative outside of a monastery? Yes. So the monastic or contemplative impulse is, of course, strongest and most famous in the Catholic tradition here in the West, and in Eastern Orthodox, Greek and Russian Orthodox communities, which grow directly out of those Egyptian and Syrian early Christian movements, and also the Church of England, Anglican Christianity, the Episcopalian community here in the United States, as well, obviously, in Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. Worth noting, though, in case this question is popping up, Judaism largely discourages the monastic life. In Judaism, it is in family life, and it is in the householder life, as we might say it from the Indian perspective, that one understands and lives in the covenant of God. So monasticism and asceticism is not part of Judaism, and it's explicitly forbidden in Islam and in the Sikh tradition. You won't find any monastics in those traditions at all. For those of you keeping score, this will be on the quiz at the end later. Name the 4 Sikh monastic traditions, and you'll say none of the above. Okay, yeah, I gave you one of the answers. So again, back to this question. This is going to be the header for the next batch of slides. What the heck is the contemplative life? What are we trying to understand here? So might we be able to adapt some of those practices to our lives? So I'm going to quote Brian McLaren for a couple of slides. And he's going to start with the problem, and he's going to get to the answer. He says, when people are flooded with misinformation, they just don't know what to think. So they suspend thinking. They just consume content, judging it for how interesting or clever it is, having lost the ability to discern whether it is true, half-true, or false. Meanwhile, they must keep acting and living, so they live and act without serious thought, consuming, liking, subscribing, and consuming more. Not me, of course, but all of you, you know. So I follow Brian McLaren on social media. That dude is on his phone all day, trust me. So we're all here. So we have a number of words to describe living without coherent thought. Here's a few: madness, foolishness, insanity. How do we survive in a time when hurricane force deception and madness levels are reaching flood stage? One answer might surprise you, he writes: contemplation. For people facing a flood of madness, contemplation becomes not a luxury, but a survival strategy. There's the title of this talk that I got from him. Contemplation is a way of sequestering our attention from the floods of propaganda and misinformation in which we swim these days, on top of normal levels of advertising, amusement, and gossip. I mean, it was already bad enough. And so that's a simple and I think workable definition of contemplation for us: sequestering away, getting away from our screens. I have a dear friend in the United Kingdom who takes a Sunday Sabbath from all of her screens. And when I email her on Saturday night, she always writes me back on Monday, sorry. And so what would that simple act mean? To just take your phone, power it down, and put it in a drawer for 24 hours, and just go back to the 19th century. And not to mention computers and all the rest. So that's just one little practice that a friend of mine does. That's an example of a contemplative practice. Now it helps that she lives in Dartmoor, and she walks along the moors, and and it's like, yeah, and meditates among 10,000-year-old stone ruins of God knows who built those crazy things out in the middle of these British moors. So that's a pretty mystical place. I think you can find it right here as well. It's not about having to buy a plane ticket to a special place. So he goes on, by pulling away into solitude and descending into silence, we allow ourselves to recenter, recalibrate, and cleanse our mental palate with a sweet sip of holy silence, like that story I told you about the nun who I met last night. For those of us in the Christian traditions, and Brian is largely talking to them, writing this newsletter in this publication of the Centers for Action and Contemplation, which is largely a progressive Christian kind of community. So for those of us in Christian traditions, we withdraw from the public world of propaganda and allow ourselves to rest, to bathe, to marinate in the presence of divine truth, love, wonder, and joy. And in this way, solitary contemplation becomes the doorway into communion with the Spirit, in whom we find a new relationship with ourselves, with others, with history, and with the cosmos. That last sentence is particularly striking to me, that when we leave enough space to suddenly feel the presence of Spirit, it is in Spirit that we cultivate a new relationship with ourselves. That's pretty interesting. And a new relationship then blooms out of that relationship with ourselves, and we see the whole world with eyes anew, and we see one another with eyes anew. So in this way, he writes, contemplation may start in silence and solitude, but it never stops there. And this is where it got interesting for me. Because it's one thing to give the advice, and we all have heard it our whole lives. Oh, spend some time in silence, take a walk in nature, pray, meditate, all the rest. Okay, we've heard that. I need something more. And so this next part was especially key for me, especially in times of crisis, he writes, when truth is drowning in a flood of fecality. Nice word. I know, this is how good writers do it, I would have used the BS word probably. We are drawn from contemplative solitude into contemplative community. Italics are mine, but I thought it was helpful. So contemplative experience is one thing, but now to come out of that renewed, refreshed, recentered state and get together with other people who are doing the same thing. One thing I find among spiritual people so often, not you in this community, is they are doing it alone. They are doing it in isolation. They've walked away from organized religion of every kind, and they read their books and they do their yoga meditations and they listen to my meditations on Insight Timer, plug. And they just, their spiritual life is earbuds in the ears and absorbing content. And those tools can be great. Obviously, we all need teachers and examples, duh. Those are the three pillars of Buddhism, right? The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is the teacher, the example. The Dharma is the teachings and the truths. And the Sangha is the community. So a lot of people are trying to do it with just those first two things. It's particularly, I think, an American problem, because we're so isolated and alone. And so this community idea seemed really important to me. He says, we find ourselves hungry for communion with others who are also seeking to live examined, mindful lives, to pull aside with even even 2 or 3 mindful people for deep, honest fellowship. So as a moment of reflection for us as we think through these things this morning, what could we do better in our own lives in this regard? To reach out and invite people over to our home for tea or whatever, and have kind of overcome our social awkwardness, our introversion, our isolation, to take the risk of sort of showing yourself to someone else and allowing them to show themselves to you. It's kind of funny, we have to offer this counsel because most people are probably naturally pretty good at getting together with each other, but guys like me who really enjoy solitude a little too much and who are naturally introverted and quite shy. I don't know how I got into this gig where I do public speaking all the time, but I promise you later this afternoon there's going to be a lot of quiet and nobody around, as a way to kind of restore from the thrill of being in this space with all of you amazing people. So to find a way, whatever the balance is in your life, not to suddenly become an extrovert, which you're not, always be true to who we are, but in some sense find a way to expand into community. He says we might come together to sit in silence for a period of time, or take a walk together, letting the shushing of our feet passing through autumn leaves hush the noise of a million monkey minds clacking to the beat of a million keyboards hankering for our attention.
Could you repeat whose quote this is?
Yeah, sure. I am still reading from the essay by Brian McLaren. And so I was looking for this article online and I didn't find it, but I bet it will be there soon because this publication just landed in my mailbox 5 days ago. And also, I would be very happy to email this PowerPoint presentation to everyone here. All you have to do is email me. So if you email me and ask me for this entire thing, I can send it to you as a PDF. How you email me is go to my website, peterbolland.com, and there's a little contact button there, and you can do that. So yeah, I forgot to say that. So yeah, just a few more words from him, and then we'll change directions a little bit. But he continues, or perhaps before eating together, we cook together, turning the focus of our minds away from the bitter political arguments and deceptive propaganda and turning together toward the simple flavor of salt and potatoes, celery and bread, applesauce and wine. Okay, you and I might have picked some different foods as examples, but you get the point. To be in contact with the elements of the earth and the fruits of the sun, and there's nothing quite like breaking bread with others. And I think about all of the probably over 1 million people who are literally right now marching in thousands and thousands of American towns and cities. I think there's 10 different marches just in San Diego County. And so I think of the solidarity they're experiencing. I was on social media this morning, of course, because it's a day that ends in Y. And I'm seeing friends posting pictures from the trolley as they're all heading downtown to Waterfront Park with all their crazy signs and hats, and they're singing and they're laughing. And I remember at the Women's March, many years ago now, that same experience of going downtown with my wife, and the feeling of camaraderie in sharing that experience is what Brian's talking about, of living intentionally, taking a little risk, because obviously today it's actually a risk to go to a march. It's a risk to wear a rainbow pin. It's a risk. A friend of mine told me that he scraped the rainbow flag off the back windshield, the back window of his car, because he was tired of having his car keyed and having to repaint the side of his car. He said, I can't afford it. I'm taking the rainbow flag off my car. And as a gay man, he was telling me this with tears in his eyes. that he lives in a country now, in a society now, where something has authorized violence in a way that maybe we haven't seen before. So all the, oh, cool, we got the navigation. Head east. Okay, I will head east in the next slide. Yeah, when that's beautiful. These things. Siri is always listening. It's incredible. When even 2 or 3 of us gather in the name of truth, he writes, obviously referencing a scriptural passage, honesty and love in the name of courage, compassion, and kindness, we find ourselves feeling joined by another presence, the presence of Christ in his tradition, the way, the truth, and the life. So again, that sense of leaving enough room for God consciousness to arise in whatever name you use for that. He says, we listen to each other with compassion and curiosity. We speak to one another with wisdom and wonder. We turn together toward the light. And that helps us create islands of sanity in a world that is losing its mind. In one passage in the essay, he says, when we build intentional contemplative communities like this, the regime has no power here. That's a nice way to put it. So how contemplative practice protects us from authoritarianism? That's something that he's particularly keen about in this piece, that authoritarianism, and he just lists some famous examples from throughout history. He really bends over backwards to make clear he's not attacking the current American administration. This is a much more general conversation. Apply it to current events however you wish. So he lists a bunch of classic examples of authoritarianism: Nazism, Maoism, Leninism, radical Islam, Christian or Hindu nationalism. Is deeply attractive to about 30% of the population. And he cites some really interesting sociological studies that we can look up and realize that, yeah, pretty much in any time in history, about a third of us are looking for a strong man to lead us out of this mess. You know that during the years of the American Revolution, for example, we sometimes imagine everybody here in the colonies was like, yeah, let's have a revolution. Not true. 30% of the colonists were loyalists to King George. They didn't want a revolution. They're like, everything's fine. We like our mad King George. Which is literally his nickname. And if you know about King George, he was, pretty much losing his mind. A third of the people were revolutionaries, and the other third didn't pick a side. Does that sound familiar or what? Because this is who we are as human beings. That there are about a third of us who are always, because of our fear, we are looking for someone to save us. And so these people that are attracted to authoritarianism, they are responding to stress, shame, and danger by wishing for a strong man who says, I alone can fix it. That is a quote, by the way. If we just give him the power and the permission to break a few rules, as long as it is for us. So authoritarianism always makes you afraid. Look at how Hitler used the new art form of film propaganda to demonize Jews and to drive anti-Semitism to a fever pitch in Germany. It had always been there, of course, but he drove it to a fever pitch and weaponized it. So authoritarianism is highly skilled at using propaganda to give everybody someone to hate and be afraid of. And then offer up their power to protect you from the thing that they just made you afraid of. And all you have to give them in return is your freedom, your liberty. This is an ancient dynamic. The Romans did it. The Nazis did it. We can find this all over the world. It's worth noting these patterns. And Brian McLaren writes this as well. As a Christian, he's deeply troubled by this dynamic at play in his own tradition. He says, I'm also trying to understand how my own country's history, how millions of so-called Christians in America consented to the genocide of indigenous peoples and then consented to the enslavement of kidnapped and trafficked Africans, and then consented to American apartheid in the Jim Crow era, and then resisted the civil rights movement. And as a progressive Christian, Brian McLaren is like, how did we get on the wrong side of all those issues in the mission of being Jesus followers? And he's sort of answering his own question, because there are enough of us around usually who will take to the narrative that we need to hate those people, that we are better than those people, and that we need to defend ourselves against those people. So contemplative practices encourage opening up pathways into the direct experience of divine presence and love. I guess I'm repeating myself a little bit from what we've already discovered, but contemplative practices, McLaren is suggesting, are the best medicine for this disease that we're describing. And by the way, not everybody is going to adapt them. But if enough people do, maybe there's a tipping point dynamic here. So contemplative practices provide meaningful pathways to more effective self-regulation. Oh, that we could do a whole hour just on that. But when you practice contemplative practices, when you have a meditation prayer practice, it doesn't just benefit you then and in that wonderful afterglow afterwards. It benefits you 4 days later when you're in a really stressful situation and you suddenly find yourself tapping into calm depths within you that help you practice restraint of tongue and pen, as they say in the recovery movement. They help you modify and regulate your reactivity. You don't have a temper anymore, let alone go so far as to resort to violence against your political opponents, as happened in Minnesota last night while we slept, where people are literally hunting Democratic legislators and senators in the state of Minnesota. If you stayed off your phone this morning, you don't know that yet, but every day offers new examples of fresh horror for us to put into this contemplation. So while authoritarianism encourages us versus them hard binary thinking and tries to ram everyone down the same track, contemplative practices, both solitary and communal, train us to resist mindless, fear-based conformity and engender courage and nuanced wisdom. This is a huge payoff of contemplative practice. You're just not going to see the world in black and white. Good guys, bad guys, and I'm of course the good guy. Those narratives begin to dissolve in the light of contemplative experience. You begin to be less judgmental even toward your political opponents, to recognize they're caught up in a narrative that isn't doing them any good. So contemplative mindfulness helps us resist the kind of authoritarian mindlessness that arises when they flood the zone with disinformation. So I was really struck by this set of claims that contemplative practice might actually be a suit of armor to defend me from the hour by hour onslaught of the zone being flooded with disinformation, which I am just as susceptible to as anybody else. That's why it works. So 4 ways briefly, 4 ways that contemplative practice, especially in community, that side of the deal, might immunize us against the worst of our authoritarian impulses. 1, through engaged contemplative community, we move from dualism, that is us versus them thinking, to holism, all of us in this together. You can feel that already happening through the work that we've done this morning, that you enter into a more humane, compassionate relationship, that I am not just my brother's keeper, I am my brother, that there's an identity in what he's calling holism or monism or non-duality, the idea that everyone you meet is a being of infinite value and so are you. And that becomes your metaphysical foundation if you spend even a little time in contemplative practice. The second way that contemplative practice is going to immunize you against the worst of authoritarianism. Authoritarians squeeze us into narrow linear tracks of simplistic cause and effect, whereas in engaged contemplative community, our thinking broadens to engage with complex systems. Through network thinking and systems thinking, we can look at multiple conditions that lead to cascading effects rather than single causes that lead to single effects. Kind of a mouthful there, but I think this is where Buddhism and the Hindu worldviews can be most helpful. It's sort of missing from his Christian tradition, the Buddhist idea of interdependent arising and mutual causation. As Thich Nhat Hanh put it, we don't have being, we have interbeing. The existence of any single form is inseverably interwoven into all other forms. There's this deep and binding interconnectivity and mutualness that connects us all into a single fabric of consciousness. That's not often found in the dualistic religions of the West, but you can find it in the mystical traditions, certainly. The third way, he says, is authoritarians pressure us to conform to a strict conventional morality, which is rule-based and outcome-based, and tends to favor those in power while it denies or minimizes the harm it does to everyone else. But the contemplative mind and heart leads us toward a deeper morality, a prophetic way of being that seeks equal justice for all and that unseats conventional supremacies, and that is willing to speak truth to pharaohs, Nebuchadnezzars, and Caesars. Some biblical references there. Insert your favorite tyrant here. Wherever and whenever they appear. Boy, he really goes out of his way to avoid any current figures. But this third point is a really interesting one, that you notice that authoritarian regimes always define themselves as law and order regimes, right? And yet they're the most lawless gang in town. And the illegality of the founder, the 34-time convicted felon with a string of over 24 clear examples of fraud in his personal business practices. American voters who voted for the current president saw all of that and said, yeah, but I want him anyway, because he's the one. I don't care that he breaks a few rules. And all the liberal people are saying, yeah, but the Constitution. They're like, well, what's so great about the Constitution? We need to get something done. And so it's fascinating that in authoritarian populations, they're in their own minds, they define themselves as great adherents to law and order, but they also automatically forgive whatever transgressions the leaders make if it furthers the program, if it furthers the aims of that movement. So it falls on deaf ears that sending the Marines and the National Guard into a farmer's market and arresting people, or what's happening now is they're going to parks in Los Angeles and they're arresting nannies and holding the kids and taking away the nannies. So literally attacking the caregivers of children, and because their immigration papers aren't quite in order. And people who support this administration will explain that to you this way. They say, well, they broke a law. They have to pay for it. So suddenly some little minor paperwork offense is more important than the other constitutional law, which says that it is illegal to put American military on the streets of American cities against its own citizens, the posse comitatus law in the Constitution and in the federal law. So I'm no lawyer, but I just read these things and like, yeah, that is an interesting disconnection. Whereas in contemplative practice, McLaren is claiming, one might be able to more readily pull back and not just pick winners and losers, but see all of these things in a more nuanced way. The fourth one, authoritarians typically instigate chaos and fear so that we are put in a constant reactive mode, which leaves us in a perpetual state of exhaustion. Not that that feels familiar to anybody. But contemplative community invites us into an intentional mode of stillness, healing, wholeness, and loving kindness, where the deeper truth of mutuality and interconnectedness eclipses fear. So that move fast and break things, that shock and awe campaign, that the president wanted National Guard troops and now even US Marines on the streets in Los Angeles, where no local law enforcement requested it. The governor of the state of California didn't request it. This is an intentional exertion of something that is pretty scary, and that is right out of the playbook of militarizing civil discourse. So when we create these pockets of non-conforming contemplative community, we build a refuge, what sociologists call a plausibility structure. I don't know if you're into sociology, but they always talk like that. If you like that phrase, become a sociologist. But a plausibility structure means a place where my opinion can be heard and I won't get attacked for it. A social space where we have permission to think differently or feel differently and live differently than the conforming dominant culture will allow. And we have to create those pockets because you're not going to find it out there. So in these autonomous zones, as I said before, the regime does not rule. And these zones of freedom then become the incubators where the next generation of leaders and reformers are cultivated to lead us into the restoration of wholeness. So authoritarian regimes always look to the past. You've noticed that as well. It's right on the hat, make America great again. The implication being we have to go back to some kind of golden age. Fundamentalist movements always talk like that. The Hindu nationalist movement in India talks like that. We have to go back to a more traditional time. Too many Muslims in our country, too many this, too many that. We have to purify it. So no nation, no society is immune from these pressures that are obviously happening all through Europe as well. Crazy things are happening in the Netherlands, where my family is from. All kinds of virulent anti-immigrant energy and political power is taking shape, even in the most liberal places in the world, like Holland. So yeah, I want to do just a couple more thoughts. I know we're wrapping up here. So we know that we, with God's help, are growing something new, McLaren writes, rooted in the real that bears life-giving fruit. So McLaren makes this final point about contemplative practice, especially in community. We're leaving space for something fresh and new and alive and growing and emerging and reforming. We're not trying to go back to anything. We're, to put it in theistic terms and Western terms, we're trusting God. And as Gandhi put it so famously, it is for us to do the work, but the results are always in God's hands. So as Krishna says in the Gita, we are working without attachment to the fruits of work. Nobody is demanding what's next. We just are really intent on emptying ourselves out, as Krishna says in chapter 3 of the Gita, when we perform the work of our Dharma. That is to say, selfless service. That is Brahman working through us. We have become an instrument of the divine. And so all of these traditions sort of frame spiritual work that way. I don't know where you are with Nisargadatta Maharaj. He's a real touchstone for me, a 20th century Advaita Vedanta teacher. Just one line from his classic, I Am That. He says, there is no such thing as peace of mind. He's answering questions, right? people come to him and say, I can't find peace of mind, help me still my mind. He says, there's no such thing as peace of mind. And then you're like, oh, really? That's all you got? I flew to Mumbai to hear this garbage? So he's like, yeah, there's no such thing as peace of mind. And then he clarifies, I think it's brilliant. Mind only means disturbance. Restlessness itself is mind. The Atman, on the other hand, does not need to be put to rest. It is peace itself, not at peace. Only the mind is restless. Instead of searching for what you do not have, find out what is it that you have never lost. And then we're translating in English here, but in other places, people ask him, where can I find God? And he says, you are searching for he says, having never left the house, you are asking for the way home. And that's what great teachers do, right? They just bring it right into this really simple, clear idea, like, oh, the whole concept of seeking God is bankrupt because you are identical with that ground of being in your chair right now. We have a perception problem, not a proximity problem. We don't have to go anywhere. We have to slow down. Well, contemplative practice. Sit down, shut up. Close the screens, breathe. And in the space that you leave, Brahman is, some teachers put it this way, Brahman is self-illuminating consciousness. It will be revealed to those who learn to wait and be still. So I find that useful, and I want to share with you a poem that I found in my father's journal. My father passed away in 2012. He wasn't a religious man, but he was very spiritual, but he was very quiet. He didn't talk to us boys about it. But he kept a journal for 1 year of his life. My father was born in Indonesia. I lived there the first 17 years of his life, the son of Dutch colonists. And then in 1939, the family went back to Europe, and then he survived the Nazi occupation. And when the war ended in 1945, he married his sweetheart, my mom, Amy, in 46. And by 1950, they got the hell out of Europe and came to New Jersey, where I was born in 58. I'm 66, I'll save you the math. And when I was 4, the whole family came out here to Southern California. I grew up in Ventura, California. So my father was a printer by trade, and he got a job at the newspaper. And my family only had 1 car, so my mom would drop him off at work in the morning, and then he would work. And then after work, my dad would walk down to the beach, which is just a couple of blocks from where the newspaper was. And he would just walk on the beach. And so happy to be out of freezing cold Holland and back in California, which is more like Indonesia, where he's from. And I found this journal that he had written in the year 1963. And on one of the pages, he describes a day when he got off work, and he walks down to the beach like he often did. My mom would go down and pick him up at one of the parks down there at the beach in Ventura. And he'd written this poem in this journal that he never shared with me while he was alive. He wasn't a prolific poet. He never published anything, so I don't know if it's a great poem. But it was a window into my father's consciousness that I'd never seen through before. He writes, walking on the beach, I feel nothing. Peace is all around me. I wonder, just by being here, is it eternity that found me? Waves are washing in, then out. Feet are frisked by fluffy foam. Hair is ruffled by the wind. Eternity became my home. I gently feel. I've been invited. The wind, the surf, the distant sounds of breaking waves. There's no returning. Eternity, it's me you've found. On my father's bookshelves were books by Swedenborg, Krishnamurti. There were hints about his spiritual inner life. But until I read this poem, I had no idea my father was just a householder mystic. And when he walked on the beach, I mean, this is like the song you started with, isn't it? although that's a more famous vision from a more famous mystic, but that account of the sudden sweet stillness of eternity coming through. This, I don't think my father knew much about Advaita Vedanta or had read all of those texts, but it got up in him somehow anyway. So I just wanted to kind of wrap it up here and maybe pose a question. What contemplative practices, and then it says individual or communal, mean the most to you? Maybe we have a few minutes to have some conversation here, so or any other questions you have. But I know we have a bunch of contemplatives here. What maybe you'd be willing to share something that is particularly powerful for you, because believe me, we're all listening and looking for new tools, and this might be a brain trust here of practices that you might be willing to share. Or maybe you want to answer this question: what new ones might you be more willing to try now? Or any other questions or comments that you have. And we're going to pass around a microphone because folks on Zoom can't hear you unless we do that as well. Does anybody have a thought about these questions or any other comments you'd like to make? You just want to sit in contemplative silence.
I'll start with
Okay, sure. And then we have a hand back here.
Oh, very good. Well, first of all, just in terms of practice,
Yeah.
this seems like a time more than any other time to be diligent in practice, and be sincere in practice. But my question is, in the Ramakrishna tradition, there's various teachings around confrontational times.
Okay.
There's Sri Ramakrishna at one point, and I'm not trying to assign these to different teachers, but Sri Ramakrishna at one time said, see God in all beings, but pray to Tiger God from a distance. Okay. Swamiji Vivekananda, who's known as the brave and bold Swamiji, gave a talk and a discourse on face the brute. Okay, so there's that aspect.
Yeah.
And Holy Mother at one point, when during the rougher periods of the British Raj, told one of her devotees, but the British are my children too.
Right.
And so it's very hard for me right now, because I could answer yes to most of the first third of your talk in terms of the stress and that kind of stuff. Do you have any insight into how to know deep inside when to face the brute versus when to pray to Tiger God from a distance, but always see them as, how to kind of stay present, but also stay in the world that way too?
No, this is the question, isn't it? To have, that there is stillness in the midst of action, and there is action in the midst of stillness. And like the bodhisattvas of the Buddhist tradition, we must somehow find a way to have one foot in nirvana, which is perfect stillness, no craving, no fear, bliss. And the other foot is on the street, working to alleviate the suffering of the world. That's what the bodhisattva represents in Buddhism. And that is a model, for all of us. Jesus represents profound, for Christians, represents profound, the profound presence of mercy and care and healing and feeding and loving kindness. But if he catches you selling doves in the temple, he's gonna, yell a lot and overturn your tables and drive you out. So this is a tough thing to consider. I think there's, one of the things Gandhi so powerfully and influentially exemplified was soul force versus body force. And the Satyagraha, the campaign of nonviolence, which was essential in not only ending British rule, but elevating workers and building peace between Muslims and Hindus, it cost people a lot. The campaign, when Gandhi called for people in India to boycott British cloth. Why are we wearing Harris tweeds? We should dress like Indians, he said. But Indians had been colonized for over a century, and to be upwardly mobile middle-class Indian, you dress like a British guy. And Gandhi started, as you know, carding his own cotton, making his own cloth, wearing traditional Indian clothes, and he called for a national Indian boycott of all British cloth. It created economic ruin in England. Hundreds of thousands of families lost their farms, lost their businesses. Entire cloth industries in England went bankrupt, and Gandhi knew exactly what he was doing. You know, when you take action that some will be harmed. This is the theme of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, you have to get up and fight. Arjuna is, in chapter 1, is like, I don't want to kill people, murder, war is bad, boo, war. And here comes the divinity, Krishna, saying, you're not wrong, but if you don't take these actions, all kinds of suffering is going to occur. Oh, and if you take these actions, different kind of suffering is going to occur. There is no world without suffering. And to somehow take ego out of it, and I guess that's the answer I always go back to make sure as I'm about to take action, am I doing this because I'm pissed off? Am I doing this because I want to get that guy? Am I doing this because I want to appear more righteous than that guy? Though all those reasons have got to go. So is there a way for us to see, even in the other, someone holy, and still fight for the vulnerable who are being harmed by structures and systems that must be dismantled? And that is our Dharma. And I wish there was this like little 3 bullet point answer to that question, but this is kind of where we have to live. We're always going to be guessing and not sure if we have it right. Be aware of people who have all the answers, right? I prefer people who kind of live in the question. We got 2 back here too. Please.
Hi, thank you for the awesome talk. I'm Richard.
Hi, Richard.
Thank you. I think that partisan politics and having a 2-party system is a terrible idea. I'm very much a modern independent. Biden had the crime era that affects people to this day. Doctors prescribe opioids that have to do with this day. Trust the experts. So there's another side of your argument too, that those people aren't perfect either. And I feel like it's fundamentally flawed to say I have to choose white or black.
That's
I can't
right.
choose gray.
Yeah.
And I think that is a problem going on right now. It's
Yeah.
the experts don't always know. Science changes.
Yeah.
Medical doctors prescribe opioids. We have an opioid crisis, right?
Right.
So a lot of your arguments, they hold true to today.
Yeah.
But those people weren't perfect that stood for that side 30, 40 years ago. Those implications still run wild today.
Yeah.
So I just think that Nisargadatta is my guru and I study him. He said, somebody came to him and said, oh, the war's on and then there's all these concentration camps. And he said, the war's always been on somewhere for all time, right?
Yeah.
The war has never not been on
Yeah.
ever in the world somewhere. And so I just want to know what your opinion of more independent thought and not partisan politics.
I love that, and that's such an important share. I really appreciate that. One of the problems when you fight oppression is you buy into the us versus them narrative. That you want to be careful not to become the man. What does Nietzsche say? Be careful when you fight the monster, that you do not become the monster.
Yeah.
And so a rabbi, I once went to a talk given by an Orthodox rabbi, and he said there's a old Hasidic Jewish saying, when you wrestle with a muddy man, you get muddy. And so the trick when you're fighting obvious cruelty and wrongdoing and dehumanizing structures, the challenge is to not become the monster that you're trying to fight. And I think the answer to keep in mind what we've been working on today, what if McLaren's right, that in the contemplative practices of all the traditions, we find tools that enable us to, like spiritual WD-40, and loosen the locks. I'm putting this metaphor together on the fly, bear with me. That spiritual WD-40 will loosen the frozen locks that attach me to these binary oppositional struggles, because it's just the same damn thing over and over and over and over again. And you're absolutely right. The systems that are supposedly going to save us have blood on their hands as well. And so it is, there's something about the American experiment and that this idea of let's put the people in charge. And that has its dangers, but it has its positive attributes. Instead of having, what's the name of all the marches today? No kings. Instead of having one guy telling everybody how to do everything, having this messy collective of a bunch of individual people who just want to be free. We just want to be left alone. And as much as that is possible. Oh, we're going to penalize drunk driving though. We're not going to leave you alone to drive intoxicated. So we give some of our liberty to the state for the greater good. We give the state regulatory power over the manufacture of new medications so that snake oil and poison and garbage just isn't sold at CVS. But these systems are corruptible through a profit-making economy. Some people say most of our problems are just coming from a capitalist structure where everything is for profit, and so you can easily go around all those kinds of systems. So, it seems to me one-on-one, we are the solution to these large Goliaths that are battling above us, and through that more nuanced thinking that contemplative practice nourishes and creates. That seems to be so important.
Well, that's why I have a hard time just really quick just picking sides. And
Yeah.
That's why, I grew up moderate liberal and moderate conservative, not totally independent.
Yeah.
And I look at policy and action and not at parties, not an allegiance to
Right.
a party, but like what are you doing to help the
Yeah.
people or hurt the people?
No, it's a
not
mess.
a matter of a label to me anymore.
No, that's absolutely fair. And so we are all, every time you go to the voting booth, and in our binary system in the last presidential election, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, or you could stay home. Those are your three choices. And you could wish for a multi-party system, but we don't have that now. And so you're in Arjuna's dilemma.
We do, we just don't exercise it.
Well,
We
sure.
have an independent party and a green party, actually.
Yeah, and they get a couple of percentage of the votes. They usually pull votes away from the Democrats, and so there's that argument. What am I doing? So this is a great discussion.
Sorry.
No, it's not off
I'd
track.
love to see another option besides Republican or
Right.
Democrat. I think it's terrible and it's
Yeah.
causing problems.
Well, I think lemonade should come out of all the drinking fountains.
Well, how many parties does Holland have?
It's a mess. I don't know if you want to wish for that.
It's 8 parties or something.
Yeah,
right?
it's something crazy like that. That's how they
But
do
so
it.
does Germany and so
Right,
does a
they
lot
have
of the
these
European
parliamentary
structures.
governments.
Yeah.
You're right. So this is a political science chat now. There are many different systems. So as Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, puts it, when you do not choose, you have still made a choice. And I gave some talks after the election, and I invited 10 people to come and stand on stage, and I said, okay, 3 people on the end, you go off by yourself, and the 3 people on this end go off by yourself. So now it was 3, 4, and 3. And I said, these 10 people represent the eligible voters in America in the last election. 3 of them voted for Donald Trump, 3 of them voted for Kamala Harris, and 4 of them did not vote. And so that really puts in an interesting perspective for me, the difficulty in running a democracy. Of course you're free to not vote. Of course you're free to feel frustrated by both parties, both candidates, and to not love either of them. But this is those 4 people made a completely legitimate free choice. But what the result of that is 7 out of 10 Americans did not choose this administration. 3 out of 10 Americans. You often hear America as a 50-50 country. That's a little misleading. That it's a little different than that. So these are really germane questions. We had a question back here too, and
I think this should be the last, because we're about a half hour over, so I think this should be the
okay.
last question.
Oh, I
and
thought it was
song, and
90
then
minutes. Forgive me. I don't know what I'm doing.
No,
Okay.
it's been wonderful. I
Okay.
don't think anybody would
Okay.
rather be anywhere else.
So we have the one more then, you
I think
said?
maybe one more question. then maybe
The gentleman
five.
here in the jacket, maybe you can get a mic back to him. You had your hand up. Did you want to?
Well, it's a comment. It's not-
Okay, please. Go ahead and say that on the mic for us. Thank you.
Let's get back to the better part of the lecture,
Yeah,
and that would be the spirituality of
sure.
and contemplative practice.
Yeah.
I said this
Yeah, that's fine.
The spirituality of it all, this is spiritual path, and that's an inward journey. It's not a fighting a war outside, it's fighting the inner war, in a sense.
Yeah.
That's how serious it is as a spiritual path. And the practice, well, I'll just say this. When I first met my Guru Dev, he said, "Are you ready to die?" And I knew I was in for a war, because I knew what was going on inside of me. And I've come to find it's not the end of the war, but the battle is won. And it's a spiritual commitment to oneness, practice, and the inner journey of practice without having any expectations.
Yeah.
None. Because the world we live in is not the world that was created, it's what's in our mind.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is about that journey. And I appreciate your, and I know the value of it, lecture on contemplative prayer. But it really doesn't have a place in the world, it has a place in us.
That's
And
fair.
then the whole world changes.
Yeah.
And everybody we see changes. And
Yeah.
nothing that's happening means anything of importance to us because we know it's not happening. It's an illusion. Now that sounds drastic, but it's happening to people who haven't taken the journey. But maybe that will stimulate them to want to take the journey because it ends up being a journey.
Yeah.
And you have to die, and you can't have any expectation for the results. So
Yeah.
it's serious business, and it has an often a serious reward.
Yeah. Wonderful. No, that's very helpful frame that you've given us. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. It's always difficult, isn't it, to talk about the suffering of the world is on one level all an illusion, and on the other hand, when you're going through the suffering, it's anything but illusory.
Or it's hell.
Right, or it's hell. Right, exactly. Well, shall we do one last thing?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I watched him walking with his guitar.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And was looking for,
Yes. Oh, yeah. I'm always invited to bring my guitar when I come here. I really appreciate that. Oh, I just knocked down a feather. So I've been writing a lot of songs lately, and I'm a songwriter. You can learn all about that on peterbolland.com when you're.
You need me to hold that? Or you
Nah,
okay?
no, I kind of know what I think, but it's just there in case I mess up. So I'm going to do a song for you this morning called "I Need You to Hang On," and it kind of came out the other day as a sort of song for like all the folks who come up to me after talks and tell me that they're having trouble hanging on. So this is an encouragement song, and of course I'm talking mostly to myself. But maybe I can offer this to anyone who needs it. I need you to hang on, like I'm gonna hang on. I need you to hang on, just a little longer. I know it's a sad song, and everything feels wrong. I need you to hang on till the morning comes, and all this darkness is gone. I know that it'll be worth it, trying to stay dry in this rain. There's something beautiful deep inside this cave. So I need you to hang on, like I'm gonna hang on. I need you to hang on just a little longer. Yet it's a sad song, and everything feels wrong. But I need you to hang
So I need you to hold on, like I'm gonna hang on. I need you to hang on, just a little